So, what do you do when it feels like democratic norms are under stress? I mean, how do you actually fight back? It's a huge question, right? Well, today we're going to break down a playbook for action. We're pulling from two really important sources. First, a powerful analogy from Joyce Vance's Giving Up is Unforgivable, and second, a super detailed strategic guide from the Brookings Institution. Okay, you ready? Let's dive in.
Joyce Vance kicks things off with this really striking metaphor, the frog in the slowly boiling water. And it's such a perfect way to frame the problem, because threats to democracy, they often don't show up with some big, loud bang. Instead, it can be this gradual, almost unnoticeable rise in temperature, where rights and norms get chipped away so slowly that by the time you realize the danger, it might just be too late.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start by really digging into that slow boil idea, and then we'll give it its proper name, democratic backsliding. After that, we'll shift gears and get into the solutions with a pro-democracy playbook. We'll look at what political groups can do, the role of society, the media, business, and finally, we'll talk about the absolute power of engagement.
Okay, let's stick with that boiling frog analogy for a minute. The real danger is how incremental it all is. You see a series of what look like small changes, maybe a new law that restricts the courts, or constant attacks on the free press, or just a subtle weakening of how elections are run. On their own, they might not seem like a huge deal, but they add up. Vance's point is that people can start to forget how things used to be, and they normalize each new step until the whole system has been fundamentally changed.
So, while Joyce Vance gives us this really powerful metaphor, researchers and policymakers, they have a more formal term for this whole process. They call it democratic backsliding, and really understanding what that means is the first step to being able to spot it.
The Brookings Institution defines it, and a couple of phrases here are absolutely key. They say it's state-led and happens through legal means. Think about that. This isn't some big dramatic military coup. Nope. It's often a government using the very tools of democracy, passing laws, appointing officials, to actually weaken it from the inside out.
And as Joyce Vance points out, these struggles over what democracy even means, they're not new. She brings up historical cases like Dred Scott and Korematsu as these really stark moments where American institutions just failed to live up to democratic ideals. It's a reminder that defending these principles is this constant, ongoing part of the story.
Okay, so if that's the problem, the big question is how do you respond? Let's pivot from defining the challenge to figuring out the solution. This is where the Brookings Institution report comes in, laying out what it calls a playbook for pro-democracy forces, and it identifies the key groups who have a part to play.
The playbook basically breaks down the defense of democracy across four major fronts. It looks at the role of political groups, both the ones in power and the ones in opposition. Then it broadens out to the crucial pillars of society. You've got citizen groups and the media. And finally, it gets into the powerful influence of the private sector.
Let's kick things off with the political opposition. In a system that's starting to see this democratic backsliding, these groups are, a lot of the time, the first and most direct line of defense. They're working both inside the halls of government and out on the streets.
And this image right here, it's a perfect illustration of what that can look like. This is from a 2019 protest in Turkey, and you see this massive public rally for an opposition candidate. The Brookings report calls things like protests, strikes, and boycotts crucial extra-institutional tools. These are the ways opposition groups can mobilize support and, frankly, raise the stake.
So what does the playbook say the opposition should actually do? Well, a few big things. First, form broad coalitions. You got to unite different groups around that one shared goal, defending democracy. They also say you need to be all over election monitoring. And here's a crucial one. You have to present a positive, inclusive vision for the future. It can't just be about attacking who's in power. The whole idea is to fight back against every single illiberal act, using the system's own rules to pump the brakes on that erosion.
But look, this fight isn't just up to the politicians. The playbook makes it crystal clear that a healthy democracy leans on these strong pillars throughout society. We're talking about organized citizen groups, a free press, and a responsible business community. When we say civil society, think nonprofits, activist groups, community organizations, and for them, the key is mobilization. The research on this is really clear. Nonviolent civil resistance works best when it brings together a huge, diverse group of people. The report says this makes a movement much harder for a government to ignore, to try and discredit, or to isolate. And you just can't have a healthy democracy without a free and independent press. I mean, it's impossible. Its job is to be the watchdog, right? To investigate public officials and make sure we, the citizens, are informed. Because an informed public, well, that's the ultimate check on power. So, to keep the media strong, the Brookings Report has some ideas. Better training and education for journalists, stronger professional groups that can protect them, a culture of really robust media criticism to keep standards high, and, this one's critical, finding ways to be financially independent so they're not beholden to the state or to corporate influence.
Now, the private sector, it's in a really unique spot. It can either be a powerful ally for democracy by resisting corruption and backing the rule of law, or it can be a really harmful force. The report has this big warning against something called state capture. That's when corporations use their muscle to shape laws just for their own private benefit, and in doing so, they undermine the entire democratic process.
And this is kind of what state capture looks like in theory. When that illegal financial influence just completely corrupts the whole idea that a government should work for the public, not for a handful of private interests. It's a direct threat to representative democracy.
So what's the play? The playbook calls on the private sector to actively fight back against corruption, to use its platform for positive activism and philanthropy. And for social media companies specifically, they have a big role to play in promoting digital literacy and working together to fight all that disinformation.
Okay, so here's the crucial point, the thing that ties this all together. It doesn't matter if you're looking at politics, at civil society, or at business. There is one single theme that runs through both Joyce Vance's call to action and the entire Brookings playbook, and that is the absolute, undeniable necessity of active engagement.
I really want to leave you with this quote from the Brookings Report because it just sums it all up perfectly. Just having democratic institutions isn't enough. Democracy is like a muscle. It only gets stronger when you actually use it. The real power to make a difference, it comes from the willingness of people and organizations to wield their power and hold their leaders accountable.
Ultimately, what both of these sources are screaming from the rooftops is that democracy is not a spectator sport. It demands our constant attention, our participation. And that leads us with this one final question to really think about. What does active and informed engagement truly look like for each and every one of us today?